In yesterday's show, I was introduced the Theodore Olson's article in Newsweek magazine, January 18th, 2010 issue, The Conservative Case for Gay Marriage. And I mentioned it's a poorly argued defense of it all. Some of the arguments in it are really amateurish. If he's done any study out there on how people have dealt with the homosexual marriage issue, he doesn't show in this article. And if he were ever to go into a courtroom on this, if he didn't have judges already predisposed to the homosexual marriage, he would get trounced in the courtroom. And he makes his first appeal by going to the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So Olson wants the right of homosexuals to pursue happiness, but without the moral restrictions of the Creator, who sets the limits of what a person chooses that makes him happy. And so his idea is that, hey, we've been created to be happy. But there are all types of things, all types of behaviors make people happy. Just because a person pursues that happy behavior does not make that behavior morally acceptable in the sight of God. And in the end, only God's sight matters. So he completely ignores the idea that that phrase he took from the Declaration of Independence mentions God as the Creator. In that same document, in the same declaration that Olson appeals to, God is said to be the supreme judge of the world. And our founders didn't view God as the supreme judge of the world in the abstract, because they were appealing to God in the case of their disagreements, the contractual or covenantal disagreements with Great Britain, on things that Great Britain did in very specific things. They understood that you don't have unalienable rights without a Creator, and you can't make a moral statement about civil tyranny without a supreme judge. And the same is true of other behaviors. So if you're going to go to the Declaration of Independence, and Alan Dershowitz does the same thing, he goes to the Declaration of Independence to try to prove that God doesn't exist and we don't need him, and yet the very foundation of the Declaration of Independence, that God is the Creator and he's the supreme judge of the world. Now, if he's the supreme judge in the world, then you better pay attention to this judge, not only on the issue of civil tyranny, but also because civil tyranny is simply a reflection of individual choices regarding how much power a civil magistrate is going to use. And if that's true for the individual as it relates to the state, then the same is true as the individual as it relates to the state in terms of homosexuality. Now, keep in mind that Olson is supporting homosexual marriage. Marriage is a creation ordinance. Genesis chapter 3, verses 20 through 25. You also find Jesus reiterating that and appealing to Genesis chapter 2 in Matthew chapter 19, verses 4 through 6. Now, the state is designed to protect marriage, not to redefine it. There is no such thing as marriage without God. And I'll get into this a little bit later. Homosexuals want God's blessing of their union, but they don't want God's definition of marriage. The United States Supreme Court, Olson argues, has repeatedly held that marriage is one of the most fundamental rights that we have as Americans under our Constitution. Well, the Supreme Court may have said so, but the Constitution doesn't say a word about marriage. In fact, there is little morality in the Constitution itself. You have to look elsewhere for morality. The constitutional framers assumed, wrongly in my opinion, that an outside body of law would define morality. And this would be maintained. Most of our founders adopted William Blackstone's version of law, and we see that in the Declaration's language of the laws of nature and of nature's God. And you can read this in Blackstone. Again, I have this in the article that goes along with this talk, with this show today. And this is what Blackstone said. Thus, when the Supreme Being formed the universe and created matter out of nothing, he impressed certain principles upon the matter from which he can never depart and without which it would cease to be. The law of nature, being coeval with mankind and dictated by God himself, is of course superior in obligation to any other. It is binding over all the globe, in all countries, and at all times. No human laws are in validity if contrary to this. and such of them as are valid derive all their force and all their authority from the original. But in order to apply this to the particular exigencies of each individual, it is still necessary to have recourse to reason, whose office it is to discover, as was before observed, what the law of nature directs in every circumstance of life, by considering what method will tend the most effectually to our own substantial happiness. And then he finishes with, upon these two foundations, the law of nature and the law of revelation, depend all human laws. That is to say, no human laws should be permitted to contradict these. And so if you're going to appeal to the Declaration of Independence on the laws of nature's God, you have to understand the historical context of that. And that historical context, of course, is found in Blackstone's view of natural law. And he saw natural law and revealed law to be one and the same. And our founders derived from this natural law the idea that homosexuality was unnatural. Paul uses the same language in Romans chapter 1. And so if you're going to look at the founders and you're going to look at the Declaration of Independence, you have to understand the context of that. Now, of course, Blackstone's view was made obsolete by Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution. Once evolution came in, an evolving material universe inevitably results in an evolving morality. And that's what we've got today, and that's where Olson is and many of these other so-called conservatives. They've adopted this idea of a Darwinian view of morality, and it's being pushed that way. And so for Olson, marriage is now a civil bond to be defined exclusively by civil authorities. In the world that has accepted the tenets of evolution, the definition of marriage is as pliable as silly putty. 3 men, 3 women, 2 women and 1 man, adult consenting father and son, adult consenting father and daughter. Where does it end? If it is the pursuit of happiness we're all about, and we can then pursue happiness in our own way, then there are no moral boundaries of dealing with anything related to marriage. Why just homosexual marriage here? You're going to see this continue to go on. Olson objects to any appeal to religion as a prohibition against homosexual marriage. He writes, I understand that reject certain religious teachings that denounce homosexuality as morally wrong, illegitimate, or unnatural, and I take strong exception to those who argue that same-sex relationships should be discouraged by society and law. So there you have it. He goes to the Declaration of Independence, appeals to the Declaration of Independence, in the very section which says there is a creator, the very document that says that God is the judge of the universe, and then he dismisses all of that. You don't have any unalienable rights unless you have a creator. You can't make moral distinctions in the world unless you have a supreme judge of the world. So once you get rid of religious teachings, as author Leff has stated, everything is up for grabs. And then Olson compares homosexual marriage to past racial discrimination laws. We once tolerated laws throughout this nation that prohibited marriage between persons of different races. Yes, we did. But racial identity is not the same as sexual behavior. Former Secretary of State Colin Powell stated, skin color is a benign, non-behavioral characteristic. Sexual orientation is perhaps the most profound of human behavioral characteristics. Comparison of the two is a convenient but invalid argument. Black pastor Ken Hutcherson, a prominent and well-respected pastor in Seattle, makes a similar statement. And a majority of black pastors and probably a majority of people in the black community say this, don't compare your sin to my skin. We are dealing with a particular behavior here, and Colin Powell has gotten it right, and other blacks have gotten it right as well. Homosexuality is a sin, and we know this because God has told us so.